Okay, let's see here. Are we live? Is it working? Well, let's just turn this down. Let's do a test here. Okay, it seems like it's working. Okay, there's no reason to test that out anymore then. Hello everybody. Welcome to a live thing. It's like 11 at night over here, and I can't sleep. I don't really feel like sleeping anyway. So I thought I'd put on a video game and try and get into that comfy state. Because man, for the last day, I keep thinking about when Discord, application Discord, was comfy. When I saw it as something that was comfy. And part of me wonders why it is that I don't view that to be the case anymore. I have some very specific moments that I'm having a lot of fun in, but like that feeling of getting up each day and going to Discord and like having something in place that you felt like was your routine, that it was new to you at the time and it just felt specific. Nowadays, it's not that it doesn't feel specific or even that the people who I talk to are bad in any way. I had some of the most fun recently that I've ever had um, on the platform. But that feeling, that very specific feeling that I felt each time I went onto the application just feels like it's gone. That that flowery, you know, days like experience, it just isn't there. I don't know why that is. I think maybe part of it is the fact that I had just been making friends at the time, never had real friends before, and so I guess I was overly excited by the medium itself, and so it kind of skewed my perception of what it was that I was partaking in. But even so, like, it feels so strange to me to always be sitting here and longing for that specific existence, that time in which I had liked living that way. Something feels different, but I can't place whether that difference is negative or positive. It just feels different, and that kind of makes me long for what the past was. It's those types of thoughts is what I get into when I'm trying to get to bed or just when the late night comes. At least if uh, it's quote unquote late at night and I'm sitting around uh, and I'm sitting around as the sun comes up, at least then dealing with it doesn't feel so bad. But when you've been awake the entire day and you finally settle down to go to sleep at nighttime, something just feels succinctly different. Like it's not the same. I don't know if any of this is making sense, or if I really know how to describe it, to be honest. I just don't like that element of difference. I don't like how it feels different. So I always tend to want things to stay the same. C in the chat says, I totally get it. Yeah, like, I don't know what it is with me fetishizing certain aesthetics or certain times in my life where I wasn't really doing anything that was particularly exciting. It was just exciting to me at the time. It meant something to me that I was able to do these relatively simple things. And I think the way I would describe comfiness is a state of existence in which everything you're doing just feels fine. You don't have existential worries. You're not thinking about those things. You're just basking in what it is that is your existence. You feel okay with that. I don't know. It just feels like I don't have. Oh, excuse me. I had friends on one Skype group for years. Oh, I have to pick my character. For years, and we all hung out IRL together, and it was perfect. Now we exist in proximity, but I can't say I have anything of meaning with them. It's an odd feeling. Yeah, that's what I mean. Is that there are these people who, you know, meant an incredible amount to you at a time because you were just getting used to the idea of being in this close group where like the time and circumstances all lined up with one another to create a circumstance that was felt perfect, that like everything just came together and it felt correct, you know, it felt like the emotions were distinct and they were right. I'm almost apathetic to the idea of reviving those old friendships because people have grown so different from the time I'm nostalgic for. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's difficult to try and revive something like that because when when you try to bring everybody back together, everyone is so different that the thing you're looking for you can't get anymore. And so you're stuck in this rock and a hard place because what you want, you know you can't ever get it again. And I mean, the only answer to that is just to not let it bother you too much. But the great advice right there. It's still the feeling still exists. So I don't know. As I take a sip from the drink that shall not be named, the Coca-Cola can. Oh boy. Now sometimes I just need to turn on TF2 and just not think about anything. I say that as I'm doing a live stream talking about the thing I'm trying not to think about. Um, but I'll just turn on a game like this and I won't even be thinking about anything that's going on. I'll just have the game on and I'll just keep grinding and grinding away at the game. I think maybe that's why something like this is able to survive for as many years as it does, is because when you have a game that's this repetitive, but you always have a way to get better at it, you always feel like you're progressing in some way, it can be addictive to feel that everything is constantly ticking up. I use this metaphor a lot when I talk about my favorite games, is because that sense of density that you're always doing something occupies your brain. And your brain doesn't have time to think about sadness or longing or nostalgia because your brain is being occupied by the fact that you're going to be blown up. And it makes it easier to deal with the feeling. I've been drinking way too much caffeine lately. I think maybe I was using it to try and focus better when I do kanji drills in the morning, and I try to be more focused. Caffeine helps with that, but I think I've been drinking way too much of it because it makes my heart go through the roof, but it's like I can't stop because I don't feel like I have energy without it, and so I'll just keep drinking caffeine. I don't know what to do about that, to be honest. Oh boy. I tried to change my sleep schedule. As that I talked in um, my video. I think it was called No Excuses. It was an episode of Star's Language Journey. But I said I'm gonna wake up at 7 fucking 30 a.m. No excuses. I tried really hard. I tried really hard to make sure I woke up at the same time each day, but no matter of taking this medicine at the right time or making sure you didn't look at the screen for 2 hours before you get to sleep seemed to be enough to get me to sleep at the same time. It just didn't work. I don't know if my brain is just wrong or messed up, but I've noticed this trend throughout my life ever since I was little bitty kid, that I've never been able to sleep at the same time. I'll end up laying there for hours upon hours in bed, and when I finally do have to wake up, I only got a few hours of sleep because I just couldn't get to sleep. And in the instances in which I'm forced to go outside to do whatever it is that I have to do that day or just be awake at that time, I either fall asleep during that time or I stay awake and still not able to fix my sleep schedule. I end up messing up in the same way again. And so I keep having these cycles of, only getting a few hours of sleep or just sleeping differently each day. They tell you that the human brain is messed up if it can't wake up at the same time each day, that you're going to be more sad, you're going to be less productive. But what if that's just my baseline existence, is not being able to sleep at the same time? You know how terrifying that is. I've tried all of these methods. I've looked at all of the advice that I could possibly look at in the case of fixing sleep, and I just haven't been able to. I've been actively trying to do this for the last 10 fucking years. Back when, my mom would talk to me about how to get to sleep better at 7 years old. Like, if I've been doing it this long and then juggling IRL schedules that I had to do when I had to wake up at 5 a.m. and then be out for the bus at 6 for a 1 hour bus ride, when I kept having to do that for a decent amount of time and it still did not work every single day, I just ended up kind of going insane because I wasn't getting sleep. I think it tells you a lot about how it is that I view things, how it is that I just experience sleep. I don't know what other way to break it. I don't know how else I'm going to exist in this space we call the planet Earth, because I've tried everything I can try in any theoretical or practical sense to fix my sleep schedule, and it just has not worked. I don't know what I could possibly do that could change that. And it made me feel so defeated because I wanted to wake up at the same time because I believed it would help me in my Japanese studies. But if I have to force myself again and again to try and work at fixing the sleep schedule to no avail, I feel like I should just be focusing on other aspects of the study, other ways to remain productive, rather than trying to siphon myself into this very peculiar position that I'm not used to standing in. I don't know. I really don't know. I wake up super late according to other high schoolers because I live right next to the damn school and I still feel like my baseline energy is lower than most people. Exactly. Like, I lived particularly far away, so I had to get it right. But there was a year, well, half a year, that I lived at a house that was right by the school. It was in a city called Dover, Dover, Tennessee. I lived there, and then the high school that I went to, Stewart County High School, which I'm saying all this because I don't even live in the state. The high school that I went to, I was able to go there like in 14 minutes, 10 minutes, barely any time. And the only reason it did take 10 minutes was because I had to separate onto another bus when I got to the middle school. And that was only for wait time. The middle school was absurdly close to the high school. And so when I would get there, it would feel like a joke, like I would have to wake up at 5, At the old house, at the one that I lived in Indian Mound, which was pretty far away, had to go through a lot of trees and stuff, back roads, things like that. I could just get there, wake up at 7. I could wake up at 7 a.m. and I could get there easy in no time. It was so weird, the dichotomy between these two things. And even then, I could not get the proper sleep. Even then, when I had a schedule that was extremely flexible, allowed me to sleep more, allowed me to stay up later, I still couldn't keep a quote unquote consistent schedule. And it was a real nightmare. I was not getting sleep. Um, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think this is something that I can ever fix. Like, I feel like I'm just going to be like this for the rest of my life. And the implications of that can be kind of scary because if you think about the job market, what it requires is that it requires you to wake up at a consistent time so you can always be at your place of employment. Well, I can't necessarily do that if my head is messed up like this. What am I going to do? They don't have a disability check for people who can't sleep. Like, the only thing I could possibly do is be a freelancer and be my own boss. This was actually a prediction that I had in 2016. Um, but even before that, like 2014 and 2013, and to varying degrees before those years in my development, I had always believed, even just in the back of my head, that I was not going to succeed in life. I was terrified of that because I didn't feel I had a good enough education, and I didn't feel that it was possible for me to succeed. And it was one of those things that weighed over my head. The only thing I really knew how to do was distract myself from it. That was the only thing I could do, was because it felt like this reality was just weighing over me, and I didn't have an answer to it. I didn't have something that I could just come up with. But in late 2016, when I found Digi's content, I thought, I just have to make a bunch of clickbait videos and then post them on our anime, and I'll be fine. I'll be able to make money off of Patreon. I just have to keep practicing at it. It turned out that wasn't true because, when you look at the market, when you really analyze what it is that YouTube was at the time and what it is today, it's not going to be possible for a creator like me to get big on the platform. It's a game of luck. It's about gambling. It's not about actually building your way up the chain and succeeding, because that's an illusion. Most of the people who get popular on this platform do so by total accident. There are elements that you can calculate, but those elements only go so far. The majority of the legwork is done by luck and astrology shit, like, people aligning their chakras just hoping that this time the lottery ticket that they scratch, gives them enough money to pay off their rent. Like, it's not something that you can just build. It's about time, circumstance, who you are, what you look like, and what placates the YouTube algorithm at a specific point in time, which is constantly changing. Like, if you look at what it is that the YouTube algorithm favors, there was a recent video that came out where he talked about why his video blew up on YouTube. And he was talking about how click-through rates and watch time are huge indicators for content success. But what was interesting about the video is that he talked about how YouTube has moved more and more away from subscriptions, and so they're constantly updating the algorithm based upon what people are watching and what is being produced. So they're not going to promote creators that you've been watching as much. They're going to try to promote newer creators to you as much as possible based on the click-through rates and the watch time. And immediately this hampers the success of a lot of people, because if you're not making, multiple videos a week over 10 minutes on very trendy subjects immediately, and doing so in a way that fulfills a niche instead of just copies what it is other people are doing, um, then you're not going to be able to succeed in that spot. You have to find a niche where people can recognize you for being you. And people have done that with my content, but they've done it for reasons that aren't necessarily marketable to the broadest audience at this point. And I do get a modest amount on Patreon, especially for the size of my channel, but it's not something that you can just live off of, you know? It's something that I can buy a few books or a few games. It's not something that you can look at and say, this is my salary. So that's out of the window. But in 2016, I thought that was my only hope. I thought YouTube was the only thing that I could possibly do that would make money because I had so little hope for so long at that point. Um, let me see, what kinds of freelance jobs have you wondered about other than translation? I've only really thought about translation. I thought maybe I could get someone to pay me to voice their videos or like edit their videos for them. So I'll go to Fiverr or something like that. I don't really know how that entire scene works, but I assume that maybe I could edit for people. The thing is that I'm not particularly good at editing, and the things that I edit well tend to come totally at random based on inspiration instead of based on me just making myself do it. With most things that I do, it's extremely difficult, well, all things that I do really, it's extremely difficult to get me to do things that I don't want to do, because I'm that's just the kind of person I am. I react violently and it feels gross to have to do things that I don't want to do, is that I'll run away from it. It's like I'd rather perish than be forced to do something that I don't like. If I was more unlucky, if I was born in worse conditions, and if I had less ideas about things that I theoretically could do to be successful in the future, then I probably would just be one of these people you see on the street who's far gone, you know, can't get them out. And I still have the worry that I'm going to reach a point like that. The only hope, however, is a translation. And people tend to pay a bit of money for that if I just work really hard at it and find the audience. I could do it because it's something that I know I care enough about to continue working at, as I have every day for a while now. And so because those quote-unquote ideals that I've had have been there for so long and have refused to be killed, I know it's something that I can rely on. Whereas with YouTube, thinking of that as a potentially financially viable career feels a lot more unstable. I constantly had nothing but moments of self-doubt as I tried to fulfill the dream of being a YouTuber. I thought, you know, this is bad, what I'm doing is bad, but it's the only thing I can do, so I'm gonna have to give it everything I got. But that didn't ever feel like much, because it was a constant battle of trying not to give up and trying to keep going, because it felt like the mission itself was fruitless, that I wasn't going to come out on top at the end, and that I was ultimately going to fall. And if in both situations I was going to fall, then what's the point of taking the more difficult road when I could just lay around and watch YouTube and anime all day and just pretend like the world around me doesn't exist? In fact, I spent a lot of hours doing that instead of working on the passion that I had believed would be my moneymaker one day, or at least tried desperately to believe. And so I felt stuck in a rock and a hard place. It was two mindsets constantly battling one another. It was pragmatism versus cynicism. It was me trying to say, I have at least one way that I could theoretically succeed in, and I should put everything into that. And then the other side saying, well, the chances are kind of slim, so I'm going to be cynical about it. And it was kind of dressed up as pragmatism, but I don't want to get into like weird semantic terms that I'm trying to use here to make a point. But I don't know. I feel like translation is the only thing that I could really do. Like, I can't wake up consistently. You know, that's just not something that I can do. And I don't like the types of work that I would be doing. I don't like school. God forbid I would have to take core classes and stuff in university. It would be like going to high school again. I left high school. really, really, really hate school, and it's been the single biggest challenge in terms of like brain, like mind development, like building my own skills that I've ever had, beyond just like the material conditions that I've lived under with the people that I've lived with and so on. That's always been the most difficult part, is trying to make myself learn, trying to be good at learning. I just haven't cared. I just let it go aside because it's not something that matters to me. It's not like, learning Japanese where if I do it, I'm gonna feel good because I care about what it is that I'm doing. It's fun. It's a fun activity for me to do. But with the education system as is and the types of things that they would make you do, they are not fun. They are not things that I would want to do. So it makes it incredibly difficult to try and do them. A job is no different. It's easier, sure, but it's not different. You're still waking up every day to spend 8 hours in a place that you hate. I don't think that's the point of being alive. Why would the point of being alive be to just suffer constantly? Who wants to do that? Who wants to just suffer all the time? I, but I don't know any other way that I could, other than translation, that I could live on with the type of brain, a type of mindset that I have, the way that I react to stimuli, and I'm kind of unable to sleep on a consistent basis. I don't really know what else I could do. Maybe if maybe if the chat has suggestions for my future, I'd be open to listening to them. But to be honest, I've kind of considered most of them at this point. I've had many, many long nights and days just thinking about this because it's something that I'm very afraid of. Oh, red team won. Fucking Reds. I gotta tell you. Oh boy, I just got a new notification. Trump Brexit hysteria from leftists. Oh boy. Looks like it's gonna be some good stuff. My dog is trying to get up on the chair right now, but I have up here. He's trying. Let's see. I don't know much about. I feel like translating obscure. Let me see here. Where is? God damn it! I need to like put the laptop down somewhere. I need to actually find the cord, the charging cord. Where is it? Holy shit! Where is the cord? I feel like translating obscure hentai would be more profitable than run-of-the-mill commission translations. I don't know much about that, though. Yeah, like, generally people who want porn will pay a lot for it. So people who know about obscure hentai and are fans of it, otaku, in that area enough, they wouldn't normally have someone there to pay for their shit, like, or not to pay for it, but to make their shit, to put the effort in making their shit. And so they would probably pay a lot of money for it just because there's no one else to do it. Like, porn artists, if they tend to make a lot of money. If I could draw, I would definitely do that, because you can be like a mildly okay artist, and then you can make tons and tons of money just for doing the most degenerate fetishes possible and then getting an audience on Patreon. People like porn. They pay a lot of money for porn. So if I, started translating these obscure hentai, I think it could positively affect my wallet. Just have to get good enough in order to do that. But after I learn Japanese, I want to learn Korean, and I don't know, maybe I'll I'll translate K-drama. Um, I'd like to learn Mandarin Chinese and Russian as well. There's very I know I want to do like a lot of these things, so I should just take it one step at a time. What I've been doing with Japanese is that I've broken it down into very small parts, you know, so I can always feel like I'm succeeding at one of those individual parts. You know, if I wanted to just say, I want to learn Japanese, I would give up because that's an entire language. That's such an abstract concept that our brain doesn't really have grasp of the time that that would take. And so instead of saying that, you have to say like, I want to learn these 20 kanji characters today. You know, I want to learn these sentence brackets today and understand, you know, how this grammatical element works. What is a divider? Like, things like this, comprising the language into these smaller pieces that you can just digest, makes the acquisition of said language a lot easier. And turning it into a fun game is going to make it to where, you know, you can do it. But if you think of it in these abstract terms, like I want to do 3,000 kanji, of course you're going to give up because you're not going to be able to do that in such a short span of time. And so, like when I say I want to learn Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, like it's very important not to muddy up the mindset by saying I want to do all of these right now, because it's a process. It's something that takes time. And in order for that process to undergo, you have to pay attention to the smaller parts first and then do those things first. If you come in it rushing and not enjoying the process, not making the process your main goal, and instead focusing on the tangential identity of knowing things, then you're not going to get the work done because you're not focusing on the part that ultimately matters, which is results. And so, even though I think it's good for me to have these ambitions, it's important to keep them grounded. You know, you can't just go so far as to say that I'm going to do all of these things right now or in a relative frame of time, because that's simply impossible. Like, you have to make sure that you're comprising the work into smaller and smaller portions that you can achieve day by day, and then focusing primarily on the results and merits of those. So, let me see here. Korean is grammatically alike to Japanese like Spanish is to French, so I think you do just fine. Granted, you would learn it after learning Japanese. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't want to do them at the same time because both processes would go much slower. And in general, if you learn two languages that are similar to each other at the same time, it can lead you to confusing the two together. Like, any linguist or any language teacher would tell you not to learn Spanish and Portuguese, or even Spanish and French at the same time, because they're just too similar. You know, most language teachers don't advocate for learning two at once, but if they do, they're going to advocate for learning two languages that are linguistically entirely dissimilar from one another. No similarities whatsoever. They would tell you to do that because it makes sense. You're not going to be able to confuse tones in Chinese with cases in Russian. You're just not. And so generally they advocate for that, and the personalities of the two languages are also entirely different. One thing that polyglots tend to do is that they organize their mind or the languages they speak rather, in terms of personality. So the way that you would speak in French may be kind of gay and, you know, and fun, and, you know, like you're speaking in very coy, emotional terms, whereas the way you speak in Russian may be quite stern. It may be cold and even a bit sarcastic, and of course the way you speak in your native language is culturally defined. And so people will remember better based upon how it is that they act within those select languages, not just in the words themselves that they speak, but also in how those words are communicated on a cultural level, and what those connotations represent, what is the common personality of a speaker of said language. I don't think translating Korean would be profitable, however, because the force of Koreanaboos is somewhat scary from my Asian American perspective. Oh wow, I didn't know you were Asian American, my friend. But yeah, like I think that is definitely a fair point. I don't think translating Korean into English would make a whole lot of money unless I found like a very obscure market of people who wanted a specific thing. And more so, I would want to learn Korean just because I think the language is cool. I think it has, I just think it has a cool sound, and I like the alphabet a lot. I think it has like one of the best alphabets of any language. But if I wanted to translate like Japanese material into Korean and vice versa, I think that could be a market that's worth looking into. Because, once I know Japanese, that's a Japanese market that I can now tap into of people who want translation work. At that point, I wouldn't just be translating to an English audience, I could also be translating to a Japanese one. And so, if Japanese people want things from Korea translated into Japanese, then that's gold right there. And vice versa. If I went to a Korean freelancing site and they wanted me to translate something from Japanese into Korean, it could be a profitable endeavor. And so that's the way I kind of that's the way I view it. I think Chinese is by far the most profitable because no one seems to want to learn Chinese, and it's so sad because, like, as a Japanese learner currently, the Chinese characters are super easy to learn. It's just that people aren't learning them properly. They aren't applying the proper methods. And so once I've learned Japanese, all I would really need to focus on in Chinese, because I would have the characters, is tones, grammar, and vocabulary. And those things you can knock out of the park is if you give it 2 years. You can just listen to it all the time and then become fluent. You can learn through doing these sentence cards and stuff, sentence mining, finding Chinese media that you'd like. Like, I really want to watch Journey to the West, the 1980s Chinese adaptation of the story Journey to the West, because it's a beloved classic in the country. But what's really interesting about it is that it uses puppets and stuff. And I really love stories that have puppets. I love, the kind of comedy and whimsical nature to them, the overt, realistic fantasy and drama that can be felt through puppets, while they are also inherently funny and unrealistic. That dichotomy, that feeling, when applied to a family or children's television show context, I think is really fascinating. Because I grew up watching, things like Dinosaurs from Jim Henson, and I was enamored by the formula of using puppets. I watched more claymation-esque things like Wallace and Gromit and stuff like that. Creature Comforts was a great, very dry comedy show that was used claymation and stuff. So I love these animation styles. And so the fact that Journey to the West, 1980s, has puppets and stuff is really cool to me. And I'd love to watch it in the native Mandarin Chinese, but that's a goal that I'd have to work up towards. Obviously Japanese comes first, but once I know Japanese and I know the characters and stuff, I could effectively tackle Chinese. Linguistically, they're not too similar because one relies on tones, whereas the other has a pretty consistent sound lexicon. I don't think that's the proper usage of that term, but the sounds remain consistent all the time in Japanese. A, I, U, E, O. You just apply that to all the letters. And so, you get a couple outliers like su. Like su it just kind of shows up there, like sa, si, shu, se. So those ones are a little bit strange, but once you memorize them, it's not too hard. The sounds virtually never change. Whereas with Chinese, you get all these different variations of words. Tones can change depending on the accent of the person.
it's a bit more messy, but if one goes about it with the right method, you can go a long way. I've seen it. I've seen many people do it, so I don't know how I'm any different. Have you seen YouTubers Laoshi and Serpenta? They're Western guys, American and British South African respectively, who talk about living in China and dealing with its culture and government. Yeah, I've watched both of their videos. I don't like how politically charged their work is. I feel like they have a very clear Western bias, and I would rather just not hear them talk about politics. Like, I don't think I don't think they should talk about politics as much as they do, but the videos where they talk about like Chinese culture or just living in China, I think those videos are really good. I love watching them like vlog in certain more like untalked about areas of China. And I think they're really good at filmography. I like when they go out on motorcycles and they kind of switch cameras as they talk to each other. They have a nice aesthetic. I really liked the video they did, the North Korea in China, where they visited the basically the Korean towns in China near the border, and they talked with them, the people who were supporters of the DPRK living in China, and I thought that was so interesting to see this like microcosm of Korean culture within China. I thought that was really fascinating. So they have some great videos. They do good work. I like, even though I disagree with Serpenza on a lot of his like weird political stances, or just the fact that he's talking about them on a channel that I feel like should be just about vlogs and just about like informing you on how to live there. I still think a lot of those perspectives are interesting because of the fact that he is a South African guy. And so he's talking from the perspective of a South African guy, which is something that I don't normally see, on the internet in general. I think Lawai is kind of boring. Like, his own videos oftentimes are kind of boring because it feels like, he just is an American guy, and I don't find that very interesting. He knows a lot about like living in China on an individual basis. There's no denying that because he's done it, but like it's when he talks about politics, it's just so annoying. It seems like he's never read a book in his life. He's just making assumptions based off of things that he's heard, and then expecting an audience of 1 million people to just believe it as if it's self-evident, which, based on the comments, they tend to, and it's very annoying to me. But I'm also kind of like weird about principles and stuff, is that these things, they tend to annoy me a little bit. But let's see, how goes the game? I haven't really been keeping track of who's been winning. A lot of the time my team has lost, I'm pretty sure. I haven't really been focusing on doing super well. I've just kind of been having the game on in the background as I talk. I'd really like to go to Taiwan. I think Taiwan is very cool. They have a very beautiful aesthetic of the nation. When I was in school, I used to be a big fan of Chiang Kai-shek, and I liked the Chinese Empire a lot. So I was like, we need to bring back the Chinese Empire, and we need to fulfill Chiang Kai-shek's legacy. I would say these really dumb things. Like, obviously Chiang Kai-shek was kind of an authoritarian guy. He was basically just a puppet of other countries, and so he's not the best. But I don't know, like, there was something about him. I guess it was his aura. I loved Chiang Kai-shek's aura. And so I was like, yeah, dude, we need to bring back the Chinese Empire, dude. I had weird stances like that when I was in school. Chiang Kai-shek was a very aesthetic man. Like like when you look at him and he's like wearing the military uniform, and it's like, hell yeah, he's he's a Chinese imperial guy. Like, I used to really love the aesthetics of empires. I don't know what it was, but I just thought empires were cool. but yeah, uh, hopefully translation can be the path that brings me some kind of success. Like I was talking on the stream the other day about how cheap it is to live in certain parts of Japan because people talk about Japan like it's very expensive. But if you watch some of the like deeper level J vloggers, they constantly talk about how cheap it is. Like so many of these like normies who go to Japan and they want to live in Tokyo and stuff and they don't even really do the proper research. They don't even know a lot of Japanese. They just kind of look at what's on the surface level and then they go to these apartments and it's like, bro, I have to pay $800 for my apartment. So expensive. And it's like, yeah, of course, because you're not looking in the right areas. You're not surveying the correct websites. You're not looking at both Japanese and English sites. You're not contacting people in the native language. Like, if you do the research, you can easily find studio apartments for $200, $300, a lot of them. And the reason why is because one room isn't exactly too much. Now, in the US, we have a lot of these, like, studio apartments that can be 300 depending on where it is, but oftentimes it's in a very dangerous neighborhood, kind of shady things going on. And so it's not the best. You know, it's not the best idea to live in a super cheap apartment in the US because there's lots of crime. The great thing about Japan is that you can live in one of these very cheap places, and the main reason that it's cheap is just because it's small. You know, just because it's a studio apartment that it's going to cost less. And I think, you know, for me, for my needs, I just need a TV, a small, you know, bed that I can put on the floor, and then a table in the middle that I can sit at, not even with chairs, just like a table to the floor that I can that I can sit Indian style at, and then a small area for my computer. It's all I need right there. Everything fixed. Boom. You know, a place to put manga and stuff, you know, little areas to keep a collection. But beyond that, like, there is absolutely no reason for me to have an apartment bigger than the studio. I don't have any interest in seeking a marriagerial relation at this point, you know, seeking any kind of long-term commitment. Maybe I'll change my mind, but I can't see it happening just because, like, whenever I've been in relationships, I just haven't cared very much. I've always been very apathetic, and I end up spending more time alone than with other people. And that's just the way that I am, is that I have a lot of trouble feeling a strong sense of love for any one person. And so I end up spending most of my time alone. Doesn't mean I'm totally opposed to having relationships, it's just that I notice a trend towards not spending very much time in them. And so why would I need a big apartment? There's going to be no utility in that. There's no reason to have that. And so on a totally pragmatic basis, it makes the most sense to live in Japan because it's cheap, you know, to live in a place with such low rent. And the crime rate is like one of the lowest crime rates in the entire world. You know, like, if the crime rate is going to be so low, then I don't have to worry about the potential extra expenses of living in a apartment so cheap, because it's not being siphoned off for the reason of security. It's just that cheap because people would prefer a bigger house. And so the same worry that's inherent within, you know, trying to get a place in the US is not there with a lot of these studio apartments in Japan. And so I think that's why it's more efficient. And plus, the aesthetic of the nation is great. Like, the TV, Japanese TV is so good. Like, it feels like the corporate trash that we try to make, but it has heart inside of it. Like, when you watch Japanese TV, it feels like you have friends with you in the room. It's like before Let's Plays were a thing. You know, that's just the way that Japanese TV has been, is it's sort of parasocial in nature. Let me see here. My marching band was really into Soviet aesthetics. A Chinese guy managed to make the Soviet anthem a meme in my band, and somehow pissed off my liberal Chinese band director. Just an odd anecdote. Yeah, that is pretty funny. The band director was of Chinese descent. He did not direct a band which played traditional Chinese music. Now, that makes sense. Do you live in, like, an area that's populated by a lot of Asian people? as if you're Asian and that there's this much Asianness going on, I'd be curious to hear where exactly it is that you're from. Because most of the places that I've lived in on any consistent basis that I've remained in for a significant portion of time were all like super white areas. Like the place that I'm living in now is the most culturally diverse place that I've lived in for a consistent amount of time, where the majority of people here are black. You know, and there's not to be like a race realist. That's not what I'm saying here, but like typically in lower income black neighborhoods, which is where I am, is a lower income black neighborhood, there's more crime and stuff going on just because, like, systemically speaking, black people are targeted and to be put into more poverty and, you know, have less good access to education due to the nature of being in a low income place. And so I see a lot of that, like on the news, just the other day, and by the other day I mean like a week and a half ago, there was a news report about a woman being raped right near my house, like somewhere that was absurdly close to my house. She was just raped. And I hear police sirens outside all the time. Like all the time there's police sirens going by, even at like 2 a.m. And so, it feels weird, you know, on a cultural level. It feels like shell shock almost, or culture shock, that's the word. It's very different. Like, usually the areas I've been in, if dangerous, the only reason it was dangerous is because there were a lot of poor white people who did heroin, or there were, you know, pedophiles in the area and stuff because they got into their 60s and their wife died and they just felt like they could get away with anything. And so there were people who were arrested on that basis in the place that I lived, or people who everyone knew was a pedophile. It's just that they didn't really do anything about it. I think in smaller towns, like the one I grew up in, there's these people who everyone kind of knows about. They just don't say anything to the law about them. Like, they know what's going on behind closed doors because everyone has said it. They just haven't done anything to stop it. There were a lot of people where I grew up like this, that people would know they were getting up to some bad stuff. People all around the neighborhood, all around the town, would say that they were getting up to bad stuff. It would be a joke, but people just didn't do anything. You know, the bad guys kept doing what it was that they were doing, and maybe some of them got caught. I live in the Bay Area, California. It's pretty gay and it's pretty Asian. So the topic of race is paradoxically really insignificant and really important. Yeah, like I feel like when a bunch of races are in the same place together, it just becomes kind of normal. Like, it's not a culture shock thing anymore. It's just everyone is kind of assimilated into this homogenous entity of all being American, instead of kind of battling out with each other in a culture war fashion over, you know, whose culture is going to adapt, who is going to survive, and that type of thing. You know, it's just kind of like, it doesn't matter the color of your skin because that's not an indication of who you are. The indication of who you are is where it is that you've grown up, in a very specific place where everyone is kind of like, you know, gay and runs around with flowers in their hair and stuff. I think that's interesting, is that culture isn't really determined by race. It's just determined by where it is that you grew up, you know, the way that you would act. A Korean American who their parents are Korean, they know Korean culture, but they grew up in California, isn't going to be the same as a Korean the same age who grew up in Korea themselves. Because that element of upbringing plays way more of a role than the color of their skin. You know, you have to judge these things like they're individuals, you know? It's kind of an off-topic tangent to go on, but I find it interesting. Ironically, in my school system, poor white people and poor black people relate to each other more than they do with college-oriented honors AP and sane people. I feel like the fashion sense is more of a divider than race. Yeah, like when race isn't a divider anymore, people will just inevitably find other things to divide one another up by, because humans, I'm not going to say by human nature that they want to do this, because human nature isn't really something I believe in, but there tends to be a trend throughout history of people wanting to be in groups. That they need groups and they need an enemy to feel some kind of purpose as well as to feel some kind of security. And I think the society we live in only reinforces this, where people are constantly pitted against one another to compete. And so, I think I think the world that we live in, and the years of development of that world has led to people having this more tribal mindset, and there isn't much of an education in place, or at least much of an effective education that would curb people away from that tribal mindset. And so I think I think people throughout history have kind of tended towards this of, let's put ourselves off into groups, let's let's just do what we want together and kind of have our own homogenous set of understanding that we can relate to one another on. Not necessarily agree on all the same things, but mutually understand one another and accept one another on some level. But a lot of the time they do find this group where they're like, you guys are the bad guys, we're the good guys, or at the very least you guys are the guys we're going to make fun of. What do you believe in? And that's kind of a broad question. What do you mean by what do I believe in? So like my set of principles or my philosophy? You'd kind of have to be more specific with that question. But yeah, I think low income people tend to relate to one another on a lot of things. Like, obviously we can't say on everything, because everyone is different. But there's a general trend that we can see that low income people tend to relate to each other on a lot of stuff because they experience similar struggles. There isn't too much difference than of a poor white person and a poor brown person, because they both grew up poor. So they know what that struggle is. Although in certain areas, black people are targeted more by police and stuff like that. So there is an inherent kind of level of privilege that white people do have, but and I hate using that word because I feel like it sounds a little bit embarrassing. But it is true, But at the same time, I feel like the level of privilege of people who have more money is just so much bigger, people who are rich, they're not going to be able to relate to everything that two people who are poor relate to. But I feel like race is going to be less of a thing that divides those people apart. It's probably going to be wealth, because wealth tends to determine how it is that you grew up. Someone who grew up without food in the house is going to have different thoughts than someone who grew up with food in the house plus everything that they ever wanted. I like to think about the way that these different sets of social conditions affect things. In terms of human tendencies or nature, and then he said spiritually. I don't really have very many spiritual beliefs. I've tried many times to be religious. All throughout my life, I've tried again and again and again to try and be religious, but most of my life I just never have been, because I was kind of raised in an environment where there weren't, my parents weren't religious. The only time they tried to get me to be religious was when I would get very angry, and so they sent me to church because they thought, I'll stop being angry if I go to church, or because I'll be afraid of going to hell or something. And it didn't really work. I was still angry and stuff. And when I was very young, I was given a speech about how God doesn't exist. How, I shouldn't believe in it because it's not a logical thing. I guess my upbringing, way I was raised, and the people I was raised around kind of led me to think this way. I don't really know how else to think because I've just thought it for so long. I've tried so many times to be religious because I just thought it would be better, but I don't know how to. Every single time it hasn't worked. I haven't been able to change the way that I perceive things. So I don't really know if I have a lot of spiritual beliefs. Um, I I think that you shouldn't harm other people. I think that can be a spiritual thing. Like part of like Buddhism talks a lot about the need to be passive and to be peaceful as a way of making yourself feel more happy inside, you know, of your spirit growing. And I'm very against getting very angry. I think you should forgive other people as much as possible. Not necessarily stay with them, but I think forgiveness is very important, and just understanding where other people come from instead of trying to push other people away. And I think I think on a spiritual level, like for your soul, for your heart, it's very, very important to you know, to be a positive influence in the lives of other people, to be someone who they can look to you and then they can think that they're more happy because they spoke to you, or because, you know, the work that you did affected them in a positive way. Like whenever people tell me that my videos helped them through a rough time, it always feels so good because I feel like I'm doing something that I'm supposed to do. And I think on a spiritual level, like for your soul, that's a good thing. It's a good thing to show that you care about other people. Because we're all in this together. You know, you can't take that away. It's the individual is not a monolith. You know, people need other people. And so you can't just go out on your own and say, I'm going to do everything by myself. Because even if you're someone like me who spends most of their time alone, you still depend on other people. You know, I still depend on other people to be there and show that what I'm doing is making a difference in their lives. I'm still depending on other people to, you know, to herd the cows that are going to be what I eat. Cooperation is the way that we get things done. It's the way that we survive. It's the way that we've always survived. And so I think showing that you care about others is really important. I'm kind of a Confucianist when it comes to like respecting people who are of a different age than you, or who you know, are of more experience. Is that I think it's important to respect your elders and people who are older than you, which is something that I've had a problem with for a long time. I think a lot of what it comes down to is that you know, you have to either wait your turn to speak or not speak when you aren't supposed to, because the person who's older than you has more experience, they have more wisdom, and they've experienced more pain than you. And so I think they should be given, you know, they should be given respect by listening to them and not speaking over them, by not treating their ideas like they're trivial. Even if you disagree with them, there has to be, you know, you have to wait your turn to speak, because that person has more experience and more wisdom. They're of a higher plane on the social hierarchy. And so because they're older, you know, you have to show that that you respect them. Which is a very like weird kind of traditionalist belief. A lot of people disagree with me on that. They think it's like I'm a bootlicker and that it's dumb. But I think a lot of it comes down to pain. Is that if you really wanted to understand what I believe, it would be to put as little pain as possible in the world. And so the way that I measure that wisdom is that this person has lived longer than me, therefore they've experienced more struggle and pain than I have, and so I should show them respect for that. But, like, it's not my place to determine whether they have or have not. I just kind of have to go by what their age is. And I could be wrong at any time in my assessment of another person, so I have to try and be as fair and amicable to that other person as possible, you know? I've had a lot of problems with this in the past, with respecting authority and with trying to accommodate for other people, but I've tried a lot harder in the last, you know, 5-6 months, or over the last couple of years I've been trying, but especially lately I've been trying a lot harder to understand and accommodate other people, because I don't want to put people through pain, you know. I want to make sure that I'm causing as little harm as possible and trying to give back more than it is that I take. I don't want to take from other people. I want to give to them, you know? So That's my kind of long-winded answer to that question, is that I'm not denying that there is a God. I think there very well might be. It's possible. It's very possible, but I don't know if I necessarily believe in the ones that other people claim to exist. They might exist, but I'm not sure. It's difficult for me to see myself believing that they do, but I'm not going to deny, I'm not going to deny the existence that there is one, because we can't prove that there is or isn't a God. We can't prove that, but we can choose to believe that the ones that people claim to exist don't, based on the evidence that we're given. And so I don't know. It's kind of woven into my mind to not believe in the established religions that exist, just because that's how I was raised. That's the place that I came from. Sometimes I think about it and I think if I could, I would change and I would become that religion, but every time I've tried, it just hasn't worked. So I try to make do with what it is that I have. I try to find meaning without that, and to do everything I can to, make it through without that. But it is something that I've tried to attain for a long time. Well, hopefully that answers your question. To answer C's question, the reason I don't really believe in human nature, is I don't really think it's a thing, is that if you look all throughout history, humans have done so many different things. I think, like, the fact that it's happening is proof that it's natural, is that it wouldn't happen if it was unnatural. Like, how do you define that term? How do you define what is or is not natural? Who is the one who decides that? So I think anything that has existed, anything that people have done, is natural in and of itself. And so, I think, like, when we view the world, we shouldn't view it based upon what people are doing right now. We should view it based upon what people are capable of doing. And then we should build the society around teaching people to be better and cooperating with each other, instead of just being cynical and saying, oh, people are one way because they've been this way for 100 years or whatever. Oh, these other people? No, those guys don't exist because they're not human nature, Like, I really like, the Inuit tribes, and a lot of these groups that have, like the Native Indians and stuff, who were very peaceful. It shows what humanity is capable of. Yeah, there are violent and evil people that exist, but that does not mean that everyone is like that. It doesn't mean that everyone has to be selfish. People can work together, because history has shown that. And so, I really like the Native Americans, because there were certain Native American groups that were very peaceful. They didn't really have a system of governance. They just worked together, and they didn't destroy the nature. They were, very eco-friendly, and, they worked together. They were happy. And then when you look at the Inuits, they just straight up never got angry, because they conditioned their kids to not do that. The way that their society was structured was to work together and not be mad. And so I don't think we can observe human nature, because human nature has been so many different things. The only thing we can observe is the dominant trend, the thing that's happened the most. And if we were to say that the dominant trend, or the thing that's happened for the longest, is human nature, then we would be saying that, people living under feudalism is human nature, or, like, people living in caves is human nature, because those things were around for a long time. The current society we live in has only existed for, 200 or so years. If you want to talk about the Industrial Revolution and so on, you get 100. Like, and the technological revolution, look at how different social interactions are. Look at how different emotions are. There's a reason why Gen Xers and Boomers can't relate to a single thing that a Gen Zer says. It's because the social relations and how the person thinks has also changed. And so, I don't think nature can be something that's set in stone or really defined, because the only way that you could is by saying the thing that's been around the longest and has happened the most is nature. But if we observed it that way, then, not having a language is nature, not having academia is nature. Like, I don't think that's helpful, because you can't build anything out of that. You're not going to get anything out of that. It's just like, that's feels kind of like a cynical view. Like, when I hear these people say, "Oh, human beings were meant to rape and pillage and kill each other," that's such a cynical view of what's possible with humans. Like, humans have built all these great things. They've worked together to help each other and do all these great things. Like, if we can observe it happening, does that not make it real? If you can perceive it, does that not make it real? I just, like, I don't understand why a lot of people feel the need to see the negative in humanity when humanity has done so many positive things. But there's no reason to focus on what the bad people are doing when those bad people could very well become good. They have the potential to. It's inside of them. They just need the right conditioning, the right training. There's a reason why the prisons in Norway and Sweden have much lower recidivity rates. It's because they rehabilitate the prisoners. They don't put them in there and punish them and tell them you're going to be a terrible person for the rest of their life. They forgive them, and they allow them to grow and develop as a person using psychiatry and rehabilitative methods. And so a lot of those people who go to jail don't end up going to jail again in comparison to the recidivity rates in the US. And that's with accommodation for the difference in population. Now, people would look at this and they say, oh, it's because of race. But a lot of the science behind race tends to suggest that culture, IQ, and the way people act is not necessarily defined by their racial makeup. Genetics certainly do play a factor, they always do, but their race is not the reason they are that way. That's just straight up prejudice. We have a term for that, it's called racism. So, like, to say that because these societies are homogenous because of their race, that's the reason why they work well, I think it's totally preposterous, because the reason they are that way is because of the social conditioning. It's because they've found a system that they can use, and the system works. So why aren't we just using the same system? Maybe tweak it for our specific environment and culture. But, the baseline idea of it is effective. It's shown to be effective, Maybe human nature can be defined if we observed other sentient beings and compared them to us, but at that point, that's a bit sci-fi-ish. I agree. What's your opinion on the American prison system? I think a lot of people in America go to prison for no reason. Like, there's a lot of very innocent people who go to prison, and they shouldn't. Especially brown people. I know in the 1980s, the Ronald Reagan administration, as well as the CIA, had funneled a lot of drugs into black communities as part of the war on drugs at time, as it went into full force. And so I think, a lot of these coercive things just shouldn't be there. Like, drugs should be decriminalized. It shouldn't be a crime to have a disease, to have a sickness. And you see, a lot of these people who are poor, they're disproportionately affected, especially brown people, because they tend to be poor. And so it's a real problem in the US that these people who are sick and they get addicted because they are sick and in impoverished conditions and didn't grow up with the right education, that we tell them that they're monsters and terrible people, and they need to be handled. We need to get revenge on them for making these crimes. We need to put them in terrible living conditions. I think that is wrong, because the sickness, it comes from something else. It comes from a lack of mental health on their part, a troubled upbringing, impoverished conditions. It's not because they're just an inherently bad person. We shouldn't be locking up people because they did drugs. We should be sending them to rehabilitative centers. We should be telling them that they're not just what everyone has told them that they are. That when their parents slap them around and that they tell them they're going to grow up to rob a bank, most likely they're going to grow up to rob a bank, because that's what their parents told them. And every time they got slapped around, that was another time that they had to suppress their emotions. And you know what happens when you grow up suppressing your emotions? You become more violent yourself, because the example that you're given is violence. That's what you see. And so, of course, you're going to mimic that behavior. And the way that the prison system is structured is not built to have empathy for these people. It's not built to look at them and say, I'm going to forgive you and we're going to try and treat you right. It's built on vengeance and justice, quote unquote, for the victims of the crime. But a lot of these crimes are entirely victimless, like drugs, for example. And even with crimes who do have a victim, that doesn't mean that the prisoner themselves should be a victim as well. That person still has the potential to be good. Why would you waste that and give them an entire life of pain just because they made a mistake, that their conditions led them to making a mistake? I'm not saying personal accountability shouldn't be a factor, but we have to acknowledge the very obvious psychological implications that these things have, and we should be coming at it with a heart of compassion instead of one of hatred. And that's my biggest problem with the US prison system, is that it doesn't account for that. It doesn't account for why these people are the way they are. It only accounts for what it is that they did. And I don't believe in that. I think that's wrong. There's a lot of other problems. Prison overcrowding, I think, leads to a lot more violence. And when my dad went to prison, he told me the story of how when he got out of prison, he actually knew how to commit more crimes, because the act of being in there made him so sad and so emotionally numb that he began to be more fucked up mentally as a result of being in there, and he learned how to do more crime as a result of being in there. Because most of the people in there, they weren't first timers. They were people who kept going back. You want to know why they kept going back? It's because the way that the system was built continues that cycle. Everyone in there tells you you're a bad guy. What happens when you're told that you're a bad guy is that you believe it yourself. And of course, if you believe that to be true, you're going to act in that way. I've seen this happen even with myself. Back when I believed I was a bad guy, I did bad things. But I had the potential to not do those things. And when someone told me that they believed in me and that I was good in my heart, I stopped acting that way. Because someone believed that I could stop acting that way. And I didn't want to be a bad guy. I just was acting in that way because that's all I thought I could do. People don't think about the ginormous impact that social relations have on you and your behavior. And when you begin to see it in this way, then it becomes a lot easier to empathize with these people. Also, I think penal labor in the U.S. prison system should be gone. People should not be forced to do manual labor while they're in prisons, because it's slave labor. That's what it is that they're forcing people, to do work without a wage, just because they're in prison. That is literally slave labor. There's people who die as a result of penal labor in the U.S. prison system. Private prisons are a ginormous problem as well, because it incentivizes police officers and so on to arrest more people in order to make more profits for the prison industrial complex. That should be gone entirely. We should just have public prisons, because private ones aren't going to be surveyed by the same regulations, and they're going to have an incentive to arrest people because it makes more profits. That's not going to build a healthier society. That's just going to lead to more crime, because you're focusing on trying to arrest people more. So I don't think that's good either. I think all the prisoners should have a psychologist. All of them should be put into a rehabilitative environment where they can regularly interact with other people and do art and stuff. I think as well, a lot of the people who go to prison have very severe mental problems, and in most cases they shouldn't be in a prison. They should be in a psychological ward. They should be in a place that's meant to treat psychological problems. The problem with this, however, is that in the United States, our mental hospitals are really bad in comparison to other mental hospitals throughout the world. And so we would need to get better at containing the patients and at properly treating them. And if we could do that, then I think a lot of the people who go to jail should just go to actual psychological care facilities. So I think basically I think everything is wrong with the prison system in the U.S. It does not treat the people in there like human beings, and ultimately leads to higher recidivity rates because it teaches people how to do crime. It tells everyone in there that they're gonna do crime, and think it's an unhealthy environment in general. Um, there was a separate point I wanted to bring up of something another problem I have with it, but it slipped my mind at this point, so I can't remember. Oh boy. It's weird to me how a lot of people forget that the US still uses penal labor. Like, most countries throughout the world have stopped using penal labor. Like, in the 1950s, I believe it was 54 or 55, might have even been 56, I don't remember. But there was a year where, like, most of the major countries just stopped using penal labor. France in particular, they had, like, some of the worst worker camps in the entire world, that led to insane amounts of death. Like the numbers on some of those places is pretty incredible. Oh, that's another thing. We need to abolish capital punishment. People should not be executed for doing crimes. I think execution is wrong, especially given the fact that a lot of drugs that are used to kill prisoners end up not working effectively. There's cases of, prisoners being injected with certain drugs and then they just keep shaking and foaming at the mouth, and then they end up with severe brain damage instead of actually being killed. And I think that's a horrifying problem, because the amount of pain that you're putting that person in just to test some fancy drug is pretty messed up. And the FDA should certainly regulate it, if they're going to do that, although the Trump administration has been stripping FDA regulations for drugs used on prisoners. They were already pretty lax, but now they're getting rid of even more of them. But there just straight up should not be execution in the first place. You just shouldn't execute people, because killing people is wrong. You shouldn't kill other people. That's not a good thing to do. That's basically all my thoughts on the prison system in the U.S. I think prisoners should vote as well, because they are technically citizens of the country, and so, because a lot of the time the people who are locked up on unfair charges, or are locked up for bogus reasons like drug use. I think in order to have a thriving and peaceful democracy, we should be allowing the entire population, and by entire I mean everyone at the legal voting age, to vote, which, includes prisoners. Oh boy, I just unloaded everything on you guys. I'm gonna find another game. This one has no players. Well, I'm heading out. Good night. Yeah, it was nice talking to you, DZ Dog. It's always nice to have you on the stream, in the chat. Oh, are you going off to bed as well? See? I always pick this guy. Bazooka Man is the best boy. Oh my god, I hate this map. This map is actually the worst. I hate the aesthetic of all the hay everywhere. And I hate the way that it's laid out. Whenever I get on this map, it's always terrible. Because I don't know how to play it particularly well either. I'm gonna put the stream on in the background as I sleep. Alright, cool. Yeah, I hope, I hope it's soothing to you. I think drugs as a broad stroke in terms of imprisonment is a little tricky. Like, I think drug abusers should be rehabilitated, but I also think dealers should face punishment. Um, I think that's a fair stance to have. Like, decriminalization does not it does not lead to the actual dealers getting a fair shake. A lot of the time, it actually reduces the power of drug dealers, and a lot of the people who are for decriminalization tend to also believe that drug dealers should be locked up, and so uh, I think decriminalization and legalization are different things. Like, I personally am for legalization of all drugs because I believe that it should be the choice of the individual, and I also think that selling drugs in stores instead of on the street could greatly reduce the power of drug lords and could give lots of money in the hands of taxes. And if we had money from these taxes, we could use them to fund, infrastructure projects, to rebuild roads and stuff. Like, in my home state of Tennessee, they're actually unpaving roads in certain places. And I know in a lot of other southern states, they're doing the same thing because they just can't afford to maintain the roads. They don't have the money in tax dollars to do it. So I think the legalization and regulation of all drugs could easily fix that problem because the tax money from it could make it to where you can fund infrastructure projects. I mean, we already technically have the money for it. Like, our military budget is the biggest military budget in the world, and a large percent of our GDP goes to it. I don't want my tax dollars going to another illegal offensive war that wasn't even approved by Congress. I don't want our veterans, our people, to go off and die just so Saudi Arabia can get more oil. And so foreign companies can have a bigger monopoly over the resources of countries that they aren't a part of, that aren't theirs. So I think if we scaled back the military budget as well, obviously we should still defend ourselves, have the capacity to defend ourselves, but like, we could significantly scale back the military budget. Like, our nuclear arsenal, why do we need to constantly renovate that? Why not just get everybody together and get rid of nukes? Like, there's no reason to have them. So, I think, like, money from drug legalization as well as scaling back the military budget could lead us to rebuilding our crippling infrastructure. Like, Dwight D. Eisenhower is one of my favorite presidents because a lot of the stuff that FDR did with the New Deal, he just kind of like continued doing or expanded. And so we built a lot of great stuff under FDR with, the strength of government planning, led to the economy being revived under FDR. And then with Eisenhower, he got us out of the Korean War. He said, the military-industrial complex is one of the biggest threats to American life as it is today, and he was able to build a lot of infrastructure with the way that the government was structured at the time. So I think that's that's history that we can learn from. Let me see here. Choice is also tough, as first-time drug use is often based on curiosity and peer pressure. As someone who has lost 4 family members to heroin, I don't think that should be legal in any capacity. Yeah, no, I can understand that. Like, I've known a lot of people in my home state who their families were severely affected by heroin and opioids and things like this, and it's not pretty. It ruins families, kills family members, but I think that people who want to do it, are probably going to do it anyway. The only thing that we can do is reduce the likelihood of them doing it. So if you have really good education in place, everyone knows you shouldn't do it, and like they're trained, then the people who are going to do it are just going to be the ones who would do it anyway, who, they feel that their life isn't on track, and, they're just going to go ahead. Like, a lot of those people who do it would have gotten it from a legal means anyway. Um, like, with a lot of these people, they're just going to do it anyway. Like, the only thing I think you can do is just increase the amount of education people have, because many of these people don't even know what they're getting into. I think if they did know, then it could help. But yeah, I don't think it should be worth restricting overall freedom in order to keep a very, very small amount of people from going off the deep end. I think there's better ways to address that than just, outright not legalizing. I think if you put good education in place, if you build a culture of people knowing that it's dangerous, then the only people who are going to do it are going to be the ones who, they want to. Like, I'm for legalizing suicide as well, so that I think you should have the right to take your own life if you want to. And so I'm for, like, euthanasia and stuff like that. Obviously, I think you should have to sign papers and stuff and be given the option to go to a mental ward beforehand, be surveyed to make sure you really do want to kill yourself, and there isn't much you can do. I think that should be an option, that suicide should be legal, and I think doing drugs is just one form of that. And yeah, like, I think what we should do as family members and as friends is, push to continue having drug users be rehabilitated, and push to have a culture of people who, are knowledgeable on the subject of drugs, and really know what it is that they're getting into, because I don't think we have that in the U.S. Suicide being illegal is so dumb. I completely agree. It should be your right to choose to take your own life or not. That should be your decision. The fact that the government has to choose whether or not you should make that decision, I think is wrong. It should be in the hands of the people. Now, that's usually what I say about these things, is that, like, it's the same with, like, drugs, is that, I always say it should be in the hands of the people. That's why I think like, a lot of the gun control that we do in the US, I'm very against, because I think the people should not just be able to take up arms, they should be able to do so significantly. That the way that we stop shootings and stuff like that isn't by restricting guns, it's by having better mental health infrastructure in place and creating a society where people aren't constantly depressed and scared and feel the need to shoot up a school or something. If you look at the rate of knife attacks in the UK, for instance, there's tons and tons of violence in the UK. This is a country that has outright banned all guns. They even have restrictions on how sharp knives can be. And yet, they have tons of crime there. And in other European countries that do have guns and don't have huge restrictions on them, they have super low crime rates. The reason why is because the culture has been built to take care of people, that they don't feel the need to go off the deep end because the societal conditions in place did not lead them to do that. Whereas in London or in the UK, they do. And so I think we should definitely not be restricting access to guns and stuff. That should be the personal choice of the individual, is that if a tyrannical government happens, the people should very well have access to weapons and artillery in order to protect their freedom and autonomy as individuals. Drugs being viewed as another form of suicide can be problematic, though, as households that have drug abuse often breed more of the same behavior, too much collateral damage. That's a fair point, is that, like, obviously, if you have kids and stuff, it's going to be a really bad influence on them. And that's what I say with education, is that there should be there should be more effective measures put in place and initiatives put in place to keep people from using in the first place. And that would include stuff like families, like my whole stance on kids and everything is that I think people people should have some level of training in raising kids, and they should have a background of knowledge in psychology just taught from school. Like, I think schools should teach you in a fun and effective way about psychology and about how to interact with other people in an amicable and peaceful way. And they should have classes on stuff like philosophy so you get different perspectives. And they should have classes on child rearing, extensive classes on child rearing, how to take care of your kids and how to be a responsible adult. It's like basic shit that you should have to do, as well as, how to do your taxes and stuff like that. Yeah, the mental health care in this country is hot garbage for the most part. Bipolar fag here. Yeah, my dad is actually bipolar. Bipolar people have it rough, man. My high school did have a course on this that was mandatory. It was one thing the place did right. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm glad that that you guys were able to put something in place like that. There are some schools that do stuff like this well, but I think the system, like, because the whole thing with like private versus public education, for instance, is that people who pay more want to have the ability to get improved education. But instead of having those private institutions, if we just took all of that money that would be paid for those and then put it into public ones, there would be more incentive for the people sending their kids to public school to make sure that the school is effective. This is what occurred in Finland, is that Finland is continued to be on the charts for having the best education system in the world. And it's because, first of all, they don't give their kids homework, and they focus on making the classes fun. The classes aren't too long. They actually have the shortest school years out of any developed country, any country in the world. And so, because private schools are outlawed in the country, the government and the people, the population, especially the upper class rich people, have to put emphasis on making public education good. And so that way, everyone in the country is educated to an effective degree, because the rich people are like, okay, I want my kids to have a great education, and so I'm going to make sure that the policies to make this school system good are put in place. But oh wait, this legislation also affects all the other kids in the school. And so because of that, the schools have been the most effective in the world. So I think something like that could greatly benefit the United States, because you see a large amount of inequality in terms of public schools and private schools. Is that private schools, they raise these great kids who can do all these things, and then public schools, you get people just barely holding on, and then they end up, either cheating on a test or getting some kind of extra credit just so they can pass high school, and then the high school can continue receiving funding because it looks like it has people graduating, but oh wait, the people who graduated just scooted by because they were given extra credit, so the school can look like it graduated more people to get more funding, which is then unreasonably allocated to the school to put towards things like sports and stuff like that, and the real problems with the school aren't ever truly addressed. This is one of the major issues we have in the US right now. And it's very real, like, especially with teachers not being paid enough and stuff. Like, a lot of teachers have to pay for their own supplies just so they can help the kids along that they're teaching, and a lot of that tends to lead to inborn poverty within those teachers, and having to work constantly, like up until they go to bed, because they aren't given the proper infrastructure by the governmental agencies running the school system. There's so many problems like this, and it could all be addressed if we just work together to build a school system that works good for all people, and that's incentivized for the upper class people in our society to make the school system good the way that Finland did. Um, so, like, the examples of success like this are all over the world. We just need to be taking influence from them. Um, yeah, you kind of need ambition to get anywhere from public school. It's like in Dark Souls when they send you into the tutorial boss without a sword. You're not as well equipped as you could be. Yeah, like that's what I'm saying is that like the infrastructure just isn't in place here, and um, it makes me sad because so many people fall through the cracks as a result of that. Like people who are genuinely smart and have the potential to do a lot of things. Like, I'm sitting here as someone who did drop out of high school and spent the majority of their life absolutely hating school. Um, a lot of people tell me that Star, you're smart. You're able to learn Japanese in like no time. You're putting in all this work on the things you're passionate about, and I feel like I would be successful in the society we live in if my classes taught me in a more effective way, in a way that catered more towards the individual instead of just teaching us all how to do multiple choice tests and how to cheat by remembering test questions that you're going to forget afterwards. A lot of the practice tests I did in high school for the short time I was there looked nearly identical to the real tests that we did. And so you could just memorize what was on the practice test. How is that going to teach people to be smart individuals? They forget the majority of what it is that they learned in high school after they get out. And most of that stuff does not help them get a job. In fact, most of it they do not use on a daily basis. And, like, our resources, what we're doing, could be allocated in so much more of a rational way. We just don't do it. And if you don't have the ambition to do something beyond the core curriculum of your high school and to really put in your effort into doing that, then you're just going to fall through the cracks. Like, even someone like me who has very defined passions, my passions just aren't very marketable. Like writing and stuff, like no one is going to pay me for being a writer. The only thing that is kind of marketable is the translation thing. Which, is something that my school definitely did not help with. Our Spanish classes were absolutely asinine. We only paid attention to grammar, and, I'd like to compare this to driving a car, right? So you use the owner's manual to understand the inner workings of how to drive on the road. It's very pragmatic, very direct. You learn how to drive. You don't learn quantum mechanics and how gravity functions on a structural level in order to drive a car. You learn how to drive a car. And so teaching grammar for Spanish or French or any of these other languages they would teach as the first thing that you learn is not going to teach you how to speak or, in the metaphorical sense, how to drive. Because you're learning about these abstract structural concepts, like, quantum physics with, with driving, when it's not going to help you out on the road. There's so many things like this that just make no sense. They make no sense. And we do them anyway. And it doesn't help people. We look time and time again at the amount of people who drop out or the unemployment rate or the amount of people who just aren't very well-educated citizens. Adult literacy, if you do one Google search of that, you're going to feel like you're going to cry because people spend so much time in these schools, and yet adult literacy is as horrendous as it is in my country. And it shouldn't be this way. We're the largest economy in the world. We have more wealth now than we did in the Gilded Age. Jeff Bezos is the richest man in existence. We have the resources to do this. We have the power to do this. And we have a hell of a lot of people who want to work together to get it done. It's just that our political system is so broke that we can't achieve anything. We're so concerned about talking about trans athletes on Twitter and making woke takes to talk about identity politics that we're not focusing on the real issues that affect everyday Americans. We're not focusing on our brothers and sisters, our family members, our veterans, the people who show up to work every single day. We're talking about these abstract, stupid issues like trans athletes. I don't give a fuck about trans people. I'm sorry. We need to be focusing on the issues that affect everyday Americans. And, I don't know. I don't know, man. I get passionate about this stuff because when I see the amount of suffering that's caused in our country as a result of just irrational management or outright selfish management, it makes me pretty fucking pissed off because I know these are human beings that are affected by this shit. And, I don't know. Let's see. I'm excited to see how the educational environment changes when the current generation of politicians die out and people that actually grew up in the relevant age can take over. Yeah, I agree. Like, Zoomers and millennials and stuff who've been affected by the current cultural climate, I feel like are going to be more are going to be more equipped to deal with these problems. Like, there was this clip, it pissed me off so much, from Joe Biden, the current frontrunner for the Democratic Party, where he says, "Oh, I have no empathy for millennials. They give me a break. They didn't deal with nearly as much as I did." But, like, if you look at, like, the 1950s and 60s, in terms of how well people were doing, one parent had to have a job. That your dad could work in a factory and the entire family was taken care of. Mom didn't have to work, she could be a homemaker and raise the kids, as it should be. But, because a lot of these reforms were made to, get rid of the impact of the wages that were given, as inflation goes up, wages stagnated. The minimum wage stayed the same as inflation continued to go up. And full-time jobs had less meaning. You had to take part-time jobs. That was one of the ways that Ronald Reagan made it look like the employment rate had gone up, because we just put more emphasis on on part-time work. So it's like, oh, of course the unemployment rate is going down. Everyone's working part-time. It's like, no, they're not living on a living wage. But they made all of these guts to these jobs programs and stuff that ultimately helped people. And so people in the 1960s and 50s, they could go to college if they wanted to. Their family could work, and they could afford health insurance. They could afford to take care of the kids. Only the dad had to work. Now both parents have to work 2 jobs just to get by. And then the kid still has a simmering amount of college debt. That's not okay. That's not an okay thing to happen. It's not good for people. These are human beings we're talking about who have to grow up with the constant stress of living this way instead of trying to fulfill their dreams and be the person that they dream of being. They now have to constantly think about the fact that they have $80,000 worth of debt, and that their dad has cancer and that they can't pay to take care of their father, and their father has to kill themselves because the medical bills would be too much. We don't have to do that. We could easily pay for that person's cancer treatment when Jeff Bezos, as one man, can have $100 billion. That person wouldn't have to have committed suicide as a result of not trying to burden his family with debt. All of these millennials who grow up with more student debt than any time in our history would not have to, but they do. And I think it's really fucked up. So I hope the new generation is able to effectively address this problem. Yep, that's how French class I took worked. Needless to say, I do not know French. Yeah, exactly. Like, that's what I'm saying, is that it isn't built to teach you. Our brothers and sisters, did you just assume my sibling's gender? Going on Twitter with that one. Yeah. It's really embarrassing because, like people, who were liberal or people who were on the left, they used to be like the party of unity. They used to be the people who, they were trade unionist and they worked together to try and have reforms in the country that led to building things, infrastructure projects, people working together to build a better world. That was what the left was in the US, and now it's pathetic. It's just people talking about white privilege and identity politics all the time and these weird pretend genders. Why? Why do we have to talk about that? Why does it matter? Like, why does your personal identity somehow mean more than the fact that student debt and medical bills and unemployment is the way that it is? Like, why is that the hot button issue that we all have to focus on? In some ways, it feels like a distraction from the real issues, because everyone can get mad at each other because of the culture war, and then when it comes to our common interests, we're not going to work together to try and fix things. Because a lot of Republicans and Democrats in my country agree with each other. They believe we should get out of the wars. The majority of America believes we should get out of the wars. 70% of people support Medicare for all, including 50% of Republicans, but we aren't getting those policies done. We aren't doing them because we have to focus on Christianity versus atheism and gender versus traditional gender. Like, those politics are largely irrelevant. They don't affect the daily lives of the majority of people. And that's what we focused on, is going to war over social issues and identity politics, when we should be working together to improve the world as common people for the common people. Because we don't disagree on that much. Like, a lot of Republicans and Democrats, if they sat down and actually talked to each other, instead of just screaming at each other on Facebook and on Twitter about trans issues, they would realize that they tend to agree with each other on a lot of things. I've talked to a lot of people on the right in my time, and I've talked to a lot of people in the center and on the left. And it tends to be the case that if I explain my stance to them in a calm, rational way, and I respect their point of view, usually we come out agreeing with one another, or at the very least understanding one another enough to try and work together. And I think that type of empathy, that type of respect for other people who believe different things, is not something that we have right now. We're so focused on the culture war and on these issues that are insignificant that we're not looking at what's common between us, at what we share in common. We're only focusing on what it is that divides us. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but I feel like that's what the people who really run this country want us to do. They want us to be yelling at each other instead of working together to do the things that we agree upon, but would, ultimately kind of harm the people who are in power. We all want more democracy. We all want people to live and not have to worry about dying. I think most of us do. But, the way that we're going to get there has been muddied so much by these dumb fucking social issues, man. My thoughts exactly. There are actual problems we should be spending energy on. Exactly, man. Oh boy. I'm gonna get crucified. I'm gonna get crucified by the left when they find this video. Is that, we're gonna be in a cringe compilation. We're gonna be like, Infinite Outlaw, aka Star, is an alt-right individual. Look at these jokes that he made on his live stream. Is that not proof of him being alt-right? And I'm like, bro, come on. They were jokes. I've gotten people shitting on me for that, is that they say, oh, I can't make jokes about the Holocaust and stuff, but it's like, ethnically speaking, I am Jewish myself, but that doesn't really matter to these people. But like, I feel like I should be allowed to make jokes about whatever subject I want, as long as I'm not, like, being overtly racist. Like, I don't say the N-word, unless I'm doing it in a completely satirical context, because I think that's wrong. I think it's, it's a word that has a lot of impact for people. It's hurt them in the past, because there's a very real history behind that people have, and I don't want to step on any toes, because I feel like it's wrong to try and poke people's buttons when, they're just trying to live through life, So there are certain things that I do try not to say, but like I don't think it's fair to restrict the speech of people that they just shouldn't make jokes about a topic because it's dark. A lot of the best comedy that makes us think the most about our world has been comedy that tackles dark subjects that people wouldn't normally want to touch or joke about. That's important. That exploration of ideas, that freedom to joke is important. And a lot of these people, like, they look at someone like me making these jokes or, saying that their specific social issue isn't that important. And automatically, I'm put on the cross because I have minor differences with them. Or, I make a satirical joke, i.e. not serious, that it gets up their skin. And I don't understand it. Like, I feel like we usually have more things in common than things not in common. Why focus so much on the negative? Oh shit. I hit my own guy. Oh no. Look at this absolute incel. Yeah, no, I forgot I'm an incel for the alt-right, man. That's my place here. Waiting for the next round. Oh, come on. Round 2, here we go. Yeah, I really don't like this map because it's too small. This map is way too small, and I've played it so many times. Like, more often than not, when the game randomizes, I always end up getting put on this one. I've been talking for a long time, so I'm gonna switch it over to the chat. How are you doing, Yakyo? What time is it over there? It's pretty late, where I live. It's like, I think it's like, almost 1 a.m. at this point. How goes it where you be? And if you have any questions or like a topic you want me to address, I'd be more than happy to. So I always like adding, or not, what is the word? Interacting with the chat, because when I make my videos, I feel like it's kind of disconnected, and I always try to make it feel as human as I can, something that's genuine and truthful. I think live streams are like the best medium of communication to your audience because you just have them right there. And you can, it feels more real to me. That's one of the reasons I love live streams. It's 10 p.m., worked the holiday and got a few days off. Nice. Yeah, I can imagine having holidays would feel like a lifesaver, because at least when I was in school, like, it was always the time when I just started relaxing the most, and it felt like a great load was taken off of me. So 10 p.m., are you on the West Coast? Let me see. I like working holidays at my job because it's easy. Oh, you're in Alaska. Oh my god, Alaska seems so cool, man. Before I move out of the US, I want to go to Alaska and I want to explore and stuff, because I think it's probably the most beautiful state in the United States. Like, I would absolutely love to live in Alaska for a short time before I leave the US. It's so cool. You guys have the coolest state in the entire country, man. Yeah, like, I can imagine working holidays is pretty easy, because no one would show up at the store, or whatever establishment it is, because people don't tend to go out during holidays. Like, there's a joke people have, about, or it's kind of an old joke about Jewish folks, is that we all go out and eat Chinese food on Christmas because we were celebrating Hanukkah, and so Hanukkah happens before or after Christmas. So on Christmas Day, the only places that are open are just Chinese restaurants, because everyone decided to close because no one wants to work the holiday. But Chinese people, because they don't celebrate Christmas, we all go to the movie theater, and because that's opened, and then we eat Chinese food. And I don't know why, I've always thought that joke was the funniest shit. It's a really neat place. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Nice. Yeah, I think I think if I grew up in Alaska, I would probably have a much more positive view of my country. Uh, because I grew up in, kind of bad places, and I've experienced like the all the US that I've experienced I didn't like. So maybe if I grew up in Alaska, I'd come into it with a more positive mindset. The only thing I can imagine for me is living in other countries. Like I'm always thinking about life somewhere else because like, I'm 5'9" and I'm very thin just because the way my body distributes fat is different, and like I don't eat too much myself. I just don't have much of a desire to. And so like living in the US feels kind of weird because I feel smaller than everybody. No, I'd like to live in a place that has people who are my same height or my same size, to where it feels normal. Or maybe if I was taller than people, that would be okay too. I don't like being shorter than most people. It's kind of a weird thing to complain about, but it's something that I experience quite a bit. Um, I'm a roll carrier for the Postal Service, so I get to just drive around the forest kicking Amazon boxes out the door. That seems like a comfy job to have. Um, driving around for the Postal Service, it doesn't sound very hard. Like if as long as you load the packages pretty quickly and you get everything on time, that would be nice. Be a nice job to work. I wouldn't be able to do it because I'm terrible at waking up at the same time each day. I've gotten so used to saying in my country, even though most of my audience is American. There are a few people who are from other countries, so I'm so used to saying that from doing videos now that I will just say it all the time, like even with people who are American. It's really weird that the internet can make you build up a habit like that. I'm very bad at TF2. I basically am an incel, confirmed, because as we all know, incels are the people who are the worst at TF2. I'd be interested to know if you have any plans together for the Vietnam Dream. Like, have you mathed out how much it would take to get there? Yeah, I did a lot of math, and a lot of, like, in-depth research on what I would have to do to be there, and like what the rules and regulations are. And to be honest, I think I would rather go to Japan first because Japan would actually be cheaper for me to live than Vietnam. Like that's the weird thing, is that rent in general for nice places is better in Japan than it is in Vietnam, which is weird because you think third world country, it's gonna cost less, but actually no, yeah, it actually costs more in Vietnam to live there, and there's like weird restrictions, like you can't get used electronics in the mail in Vietnam, and like they open your mail and stuff, like weird stuff like that that just kind of makes me uncomfortable. That I think shouldn't be that way. You shouldn't open people's mail. That's just fucked up. But I love like the culture of Vietnam. I think the language is really cool, and I think Vietnamese food is great. I think it's a beautiful country. It's probably a bit too hot. I don't think I'd be able to live there consistently, but I'd love to go there. Like I think most likely, yeah, what I'm gonna do is go live in Japan first, because that would be cheaper, and then go visit Vietnam later, and then live there for like a month or something. When I have the money saved up, I think would be a more effective plan. But they just have weird rules. Like technically, looking at porn is illegal, but Vietnam is also one of the highest consumers of porn in the world. So I guess it's like a taboo thing. But like they have weird laws like that. But at the same time, like, Vietnam has a lot of really cool laws. Like, they spend a shit ton of money on infrastructure. Like, they have, like, the transportation, for example, buses and trains cost virtually no money. Like, it's like pennies on a dollar to pay for a bus in Vietnam. And the buses tend to be high quality. There's free exercise machines. You can just exercise for free. Healthcare is basically free. Wealthy individuals don't have access to government healthcare, but like basically everyone else has government healthcare, and it's supposed to be pretty high quality. That they've developed it very fast. Smog and pollution isn't a huge deal because they have a lot of environmental regulations and stuff. Like, the government does a lot of good things, but I don't know how comfortable I am with the certain limits on freedoms that the government has. So I don't think it would be the ideal place to live long term. It would be nice to live there for a little bit. Yeah, I hear that place is crazy. I know a guy that goes there every year and just lives in the filthiest sin money can buy for a week, and then goes back to the loading dock at Walmart. Yeah, like, Southeast Asia has a lot of these places where, like, you can just get lots of drugs and prostitutes and stuff, because Vietnam is a poor country at the moment, it's very easy to bribe police. So you can just bribe the police to, to not bother you when you're doing drugs and getting prostitutes and stuff. So, like, the laws, like, a lot of people just straight up don't follow the laws, because it's a developing country. Like, I would say it's way better off than all of the other Southeast Asian nations, but it's still poor. Like, that's the problem. And so, like, a lot of poor countries, if you want to live the first world lifestyle, it's going to cost more money. Or like Japan is just made to be first world. And so, like, if you want to be in a studio apartment in Japan, you don't have to pay more money to make sure it's up to first world standards. It just is that way. And so, I think it'd be a much more peaceful place to live. Like, and the weather would be nicer, because I like the snow a lot. And Vietnam doesn't really snow in most places. So it would feel weird to be in a place that's so hot and, has all this jungle, but, like, no snow. I wouldn't want to live in a place for all my life if it couldn't snow there. Even, like, for, like, a couple years, it would be too much. So I'd like to stay in Japan long term. But I definitely like to live the Vietnamese dream just by going there for a little bit. Would love some comfy Japan vlogs. I hope you make it someday soon, man. Thank you. Yeah, I hope I can make it as well. As long as I just keep grinding at learning this language, and can learn to make some money from that and save from trying to work a normal job for a while. I think I can do it. So I hope it what's the word? Not transpires. Comes about? I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but I hope it happens, It has been a dream of mine for a very long time. Like, there's been like 3 countries that I've always wanted to live in to some extent, like, for, I don't know, like 6 years. Like, I've always loved Taiwan. I'm really fascinated by Taiwan. I've loved Japan, like, ever since I was a little kid. Like, I would just read about Japan in books for huge amounts of time before I even really knew about anime and stuff. Like, I knew about anime from a young age, but I didn't succinctly understand it, I didn't have a deep knowledge. I just thought, like, Japan was cool. Like, I thought it was cool from a historical standpoint. Like, I was like, oh man, the emperor, he's such a Chad, and stuff like that, kind of silly things, but, like, I always, there was something just mysterious about it, and, like, the more I've read about, like, the way Japanese society functions, and, like, what it's like living there, and seen the footage of it, and have watched Japanese TV a lot, it just feels way more appealing to me than the U.S. Like it's something that I would vibe with more, and so I don't know. Like I think like my set of sensibilities and what I'm interested in is generally more placated to in Japan, because they have the types of things that I would want, like the types of food that I would want. They have transportation on hand. You can just go get transportation without worrying too much about a car. Like the rent is cheap for a studio apartment, which is what I would be living in. And so I feel like it accommodates me more as an individual than what we have here, or what basically every other country has. Like they have freedom for media you consume and stuff, which is really important to me. A lot of more third world types of countries, it's harder to get mail sent to them, and like I said, like there's certain things in the post that you just can't get, like in Vietnam, because of their weird authoritarian policies, and so I think Japan, it's a much more free country. Like I like Shinzo Abe a lot. I got a lot of people really misunderstand Shinzo Abe, but like watching a lot of Japanese news has made me understand the Japanese mindset more. And I think he's one of the best leaders in the world right now. Even though I disagree with him on certain things, I think he's doing a good job, and the Japanese society is definitely improving, and so I think it would be nice to go somewhere where it feels like things are being built and things are happening there. It just seems like a prosperous place to live. Chad Emperor almost snorted my drink. I'm glad you got a kick out of that. Sometimes, man, I just there's times when I just have lines like this. It comes out of my head, and then I don't think about how silly it sounds. But like it makes perfect sense in the context of what I'm saying. But like out of context, it's like, what is this guy saying? Um, and like when I was a kid, that's how I viewed things. I was like, oh yeah, this emperor is a Chad, man. Like I wanted to I really looked up to world leaders and stuff, to kind of like a dumb, unhealthy way. So I didn't really understand what they did. I just thought guys who lead countries are cool. Oh boy. I need to take a drink of my water now that you've reminded me of drinks. It's always been my dream to find a cohort and do a bunch of traveling. I think I have. Oh, what the hell was that? I dropped my mouse. I think I have the money for it. Just need to find the energy to leave the house. That's always a struggle. Is that when you have the time and the money, finding the motivation can be the struggle for a lot of people. Like a lot of the commenters on my videos tend to talk about this, is that like they want to do things like going out and achieving these types of goals or just having fun, but it's hard for them to leave the house because they've been doing it for so long. Like the thing with me is that there's just not anything that I want to do that's near me. Like I feel like I would be more motivated to go out and do things if there were things that I actually wanted to do. There's just nothing around me. There hasn't been anything around me in all the places that I've lived that are things that I want to do. I'm just a hermit, and my job lets me be a hermit too. Yeah, like I'm definitely like naturally inclined to staying alone. And like as a postman, you're gonna be out there just in a car putting stuff on people's doorsteps. It's not like a bunch of interaction is involved. So it seems like a comfy job for introverted people. Yeah, like I'm definitely more inwardly drawn. I spend my time alone. That's where my focus comes in. But like I think even for introverted people who just kind of think that way, I think there are still things to do outside for us. It's just that we have to find the things that we respond well to and that we want to do. Like if I had an arcade if I had an arcade near my place, I would always go to the arcade because I love video games and I love the communal experience of doing it with other people. And so if there were arcades, I would just go to the arcade. Japan, like even in Osaka where I want to go, they have tons of arcades. Like that would be so much fun if I could just go play DDR or play Darius or some other, spaceship shooter like that. It'd be so much fun. Like I remember when I was playing in the arcade in Las Vegas, it was some of the most fun I had because I didn't have a lot of money on me at the time, but the coins that I had that allowed me to play like the Initial D arcade game or Afterburner or something, it was just so much fun. Oh my god, me too. Yeah, exactly. I thought about trying to start a small arcade here. If you could make it profitable, like if people came, that would be really cool. Because I think every community needs an outlet like that. They need something where people can come together and people of similar interests can have a place to go. I think that would be really cool. Maybe I'll visit Alaska and I'll come to your arcade. Older machines are always so fascinating to me. I love ye oldie Dig Dug and Frogger. Yeah, when I was in Iowa, I think it was, might have been Ohio, I was in this really dirty bus station, and like there was some trash there. I was really bored, so these church people came in, these black ladies. They handed me this pamphlet of like Bible stuff, and I was so bored that I read that. But I had been laying down on these like concrete-esque chairs, these chairs that hurt my neck and my back so much to lay on, and I had to be in that stop for like 6 hours, but there was a machine for Pac-Man and Galaga, and so I had used the few quarters that I had to play on that machine to try and pass the time away in intervals as to not use up all the money at once. And I would try as hard as I could to just be as good at the game as possible. Like I had hyper focus on because I wanted to make the coins that I had go as far as they could possibly go. So I wasn't playing lazy the way that I am with TF2 right now. And it was an intense experience because it was about real money preservation. Because like in that sense, time really was money because I was so bored in that place. But like just having like that random arcade machine there just felt special to me. There's something about these ginormous Goliaths of human machinery that contain these fun and unique experiences that mean something to us that never stops fascinating me. The fact that they're so big and the games that contain them feel nice, and like the side art of the art style of these games, it's always eluded me. It's always been really cool. That's a real mood. Gotta make them quarters count. Yee, it's true. Don't even get me started on pinball machines. Yeah, I never got super into pinball, but like I would play like computer pinball on my Windows XP machine back in the day. Like if there was a pinball machine that I could get access to, I would try it. Like my parents are big fans of pinball machines, and I never got into it the same degree that they did, but I think they are pretty cool, like especially ones that have different themes and the way that they the way that they operate to change the like the dynamic, or the way that like the things are built and set in order to adhere to the storyline is really interesting to me. Like pinball games that have a storyline to them and build the machine to be similar to what the thing that they're based off of is really cool. Like they have spaceships going around and everything when you get into a certain hole, and it's stuff like that. All the moving parts is really cool. Oh shit. Oh shit. Here we go again. It's something about all those physical moving parts and sound effects cut straight from their source material. Those Star Trek machines, man. Yeah, like I saw one of the Star Trek machines in a Chuck E. Cheese at one point of all things, and it was next to a Pirates of the Caribbean machine, which is a bit of a newer thing at the time. That was like, oh wow, recently released pinball machine. That's a novel item, and like it was only made for, I guess, select stores. But they had the old Star Trek machine there, and I didn't play on it, but it looked pretty cool. Um, and like there is a kind of art to it, to be able to make all the moving parts be succinct with one another to create an effective story like that. It's human engineering, and seeing the pinball machine is a physical representation of the strength of that human engineering. When you play a video game on a computer, yeah, you can realize in an abstract logical sense that these guys made this game with coding and stuff, and they built it from the ground up. But when you're looking at a pinball machine, you really know that these guys built this from the ground up. You can feel it, you can sense it, you can see it with your own eyes. You don't see lines of computer programming. Well, most of us don't, unless you tap into the source code or something. And even then, it still feels abstract. There's a very real difference when you put your hands on a machine, when you watch the mechanisms of it play out. It feels like the importance of that machine, and the authenticity of it is more real. Like, you're not disconnected from what it is that you're doing. You really are interacting with it. Oh no. Blue guy. Blue guy. Ree! He killed me. Oh boy. I think at this point I'm gonna either move on to another game or outright end the stream here, because I'm getting pretty tired of TF2. How long have I been streaming for? Let me see here. Do I want to quit? Yes. It's just not working? Okay, let me what time is it? Okay. Yeah, it's about 12. Where is OBS? How long have I been streaming? Oh wow, 2 hours and 21 minutes. How have I been able to just go like this for 2 hours and 21 minutes? I don't think there was like a single silent moment all throughout that time. Jesus Christ. Either way, it's been pretty fun. Had a great time picking your brain a bit. Yeah, hell yeah, man. Like, I always love it when I can get questions and kind of get feedback from the audience, going on all these different topics. Like, that's one of the great things about YouTube, is that it's about communication. You don't always agree with everyone you speak to, but you can connect with them on a more human level if you just allow yourself to. And it's really nice. It's probably my favorite thing about being on this platform, is that you can communicate. And it's been fun, man. I'm always glad having you around when you show up in the chat. So with that, thank you to everyone who came out to this live stream, and I'll see you next time.